It's my great pleasure to be here this afternoon and introduce you to our very distinguished panel. I will start with our panel moderator, Dr. Lara Brown, Assistant Professor from the Department of Political Science, College of Liberal Arts and Sciences. Welcome. Mr. Thomas Kelly, class of 1965, founder and sponsor of Greensboro Dreamers. And Mr. Alfonso Martinez, class of 1971, a fellow with the United States Chamber of Commerce and founder of Alfonso Martinez-Fonts, a business consulting firm. With that, I'll ask our moderator to jump right in.
Great, thanks so much. I'm really just pleased to be here. It's extraordinary to be a faculty member, a relatively new faculty member here at Villanova, and have an opportunity to see what extraordinary alumni this university that I'm now a part of has actually produced. So thank you for having me, and welcome to our session on education and governance and questions about whether or not government is a solution or a possible problem. Over the next 30 minutes or so, I am hopeful that we will have an opportunity to address sort of the three issues that we really talked about as being critical for today's session: college access, campus diversity, and student service, really getting back in the Augustinian tradition. So with that, what I'd like to do is give a little bit of a brief introduction to both Tom Kelly and Al Martinez-Fonts, and welcome them here. You've seen from their bios sort of what extraordinary leaders they are. They are also individuals who have engaged in education at the nonprofit level, have given service at the governmental level, and to this day continue to be engaged in these types of activities. A couple things that were not mentioned in those bios, which I just thought I would point out, is that Tom Kelly is currently working with the U.S. Secretary of Education, Arne Duncan, in efforts with his Greensboro Dreamers program, and hopefully he'll have a chance to talk a little bit about those. Al Martinez-Fonts, we had a conversation about this. He was actually born in Cuba and raised in Long Island. So being here from that perspective and having an opportunity in Texas to engage in what was called Project Ariba, he did a lot of workforce training and skills development. So I'd like to thank my two panelists, and just to let you know, I do have a class at 4 o'clock. So I'm going to scoot out of here at about 10 minutes to, because it's all the way up in Tollentine. And Al and Tom will be able to continue that discussion as we go. So let me turn it over. Tom?
Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to be here. I would like to start by telling you briefly the area I work in and what the overall situation is in Greene County, Georgia. That's halfway between Atlanta and Augusta. It is very rural. We live in a gated community, but the whole area around us is very rural with lots of poverty. To give you an example, when we first got there, the weekly newspaper, the front page on the left side was the results of the tractor pull. And on the right side, at the top of the page, was a report on Jimmy Durkin, who had a hemorrhoidectomy and was welcoming people at Minnie Boswell Hospital to stop in and see how he was doing. So a little bit different from the life I had before. Let me tell you about the school and the community quickly. Our school is a failed school, does not meet annual yearly progress, AYP. We have new superintendents and new principals almost every year. Not because they're asked to leave, it's just they come in, they mess things up, and they move on to mess them up somewhere else. It's really kind of sad. 80% teacher turnover. The majority of teachers are not certified in the subjects that they teach. You may have a education in language arts, but they will tell you you're going to teach Math 1, even though you know very little about Math 1. Very, very unfair to these kids. In terms of the community itself, it's mostly single-parent moms. More than 50% of the girls have, while still teenagers, a baby out of wedlock. Crime and drugs are every bit the same as they are in the urban areas. Education is not valued. You have a PTA meeting of 450 middle school kids, 5 parents will show up. Friday night football game, standing room only. A different value set. Extreme poverty, with a number of the kids living in shacks without running water or heat in some cases. We have no United Way, no rec centers, not a whole lot in Greensboro, Georgia, in the downtown area. Our program started 10 years ago, is with first graders, 54 of them. We run a comprehensive program. They're now in the 10th grade. I will not go into the details, but I will tell you that we emphasize academics, character, we have tutors, we have mentors from the community. We send the kids whenever we can to space camp, survival camp, whatever we can to give them a different experience. Many field trips. We've had kids on the first airplane ride ever, 40 of them by now, going up to Washington, New York, Philadelphia. We took 3 of the young girls out to San Francisco during the summer. Yeah, it costs money, but it's given them the opportunity to be exposed. You can't dream unless you know what's out there. We do quiet assistance for some of the families who can't pay the heat, the electric, the water bill. We teach life skills on a regular basis, how you order from a menu, how you say thank you, how you write a thank you note, how you make eye contact. Respect, respect, respect. As I said, we do have psychologists, and gosh knows a lot of these kids need psychological help because of the backgrounds that they've had, and in many cases, the conditions they live in. We have many special events. We will bring in many uplifting stories and speakers where the person has lifted him or herself up from poverty. That's very important. They see those role models. We also have brought in prisoners and drug addicts to talk to the kids. And we push accountability, accountability, accountability. You don't get anything in our program that's extra unless you've earned it. We have our own report card for that. And we require all of the kids to give back to the community. We spend more than $4,000 per year per kid, not counting the separate fund that we have to help pay for college when they go to college. The community, Greene County, in this failed system, and there's so many of them in this country, spends more than $10,000 per year per kid, and they get very little education out of it because it's so disjointed, so messed up. So we're trying to make up in many cases. I call it camp, and they've long ago figured out that's nonsense. I call it camp, and we do academics most of the time. We'd love to do games, ball games, and whatever, but they are so far behind, that's a challenge. Let me give you our results, and that's important. 54 kids. We have ranges in IQ from 72 to 130. Qualitatively, you will be able to tell, we've been told time and again, that they have a difference in confidence, manners, respect, behavior, most of them. We do have a few kids in jail. They dream, they have goals, and they have aspirations. Very high attendance. Everyone has made the honor roll, including a couple of kids with 72 and 74 IQs. Quantitative, 82% of our kids are on track for 10th grade. They're now in the 10th grade. 82% of the kids not in the program, and our kids are 50%. The schools came together. We're 50 kids. The non-dreamers are 90 kids. 82% of our kids are on track. 20% of the non-dreamers are on track. That says a lot about what we're doing, thank goodness, and we'd wonder why the heck are we trying to do it. We project, and we've done PPSATs. We try and do as many things that a prep school would do as is humanly possible. And we've got some great results on the PPSATs. They do the PSATs next week. We project that 60% of our kids are going to go to college. I'm pretty confident in that. The rest of the school's history is less than 5% of the kids go to college. That gets back to the Jamirs you're talking about. We've got some great kids. They just need more to be qualified. I'm not for quotas. They need to be qualified, and so many of them are capable. You need to start working with them young, do outreach programs so that we increase the size of the pie instead of everyone, including Villanova, dividing up that small percent of kids who are qualified from disadvantaged communities. We need to increase the size of that pie. They will be the future leaders of America. In their communities, they need an education. I have recommendations, but I'd rather turn it over to Al if there's times. I have some very strong, maybe incorrect, but since I'm there every day and have been there for 10 years, work 40 to 50 hours a week in the community, I have some recommendations, and I am working with Arnie Duncan. I know him personally. I've had meetings with him privately. I have some recommendations of things we can do to help this failed school system, and I say failed not for all public schools, but for the underperforming, poverty level schools, both urban and rural, around the country.
John, thank you very much, and Lara, great to be here. Nice to met you this morning. Great to be here with all of you. Great to be back at Villanova. I was going to ask John, what country is this in? Where your program takes place?
Georgia.
It's Georgia. Okay. I mean, really amazing that in the year 2009 we can be talking about this and these statistics that you heard. Let me add a little levity. Last weekend I returned to my high school. You mentioned I grew up in Long Island, went to St. Mary's High School in Manhasset. The planning was not so good, so we missed our 40th reunion. So it was going to be our 42nd reunion. That doesn't sound so good, so instead of calling it a 42nd reunion, we called it a 60th birthday party on the assumption that, we were all about 18 years old when we graduated, and sure enough. So we had a great group of folks. About a third of the class showed up. A lot of discussion about almost these same types of things that we're talking here. The short answer, the very quick answer here, is bring the nuns and bring the brothers back, and we can straighten things out. Unfortunately, I don't think we can turn the hands of time back, and I don't know if we will get, I know we desperately need vocations in general, but I don't think we'll get enough nuns and brothers to make a difference. So let me talk to you about a project, a program that I was involved with when I lived in El Paso. I spent 30 years as a banker with J.P. Morgan Chase. It wasn't called J.P. Morgan Chase for 30 years, but the old chemical bank, and I ended up in El Paso for the last 5 years, and I worked to put together a program called Project Arriba. Arriba is actually an acronym for Advanced Retraining and Redevelopment Initiative in Border Areas. What it was is it was a living wage strategy, and what we were doing is we were taking the same kind of people that John talked about, and probably more like that 5% who ended up even graduating, and now catching them in their 30s, in their 40s, sometimes even in their 50s. I think we even had a couple in their 60s, and basically trying to figure out how to take people from a minimum wage, which at the time was about $5.15. Nobody actually paid that. Most people were maybe around $6, but you can't live on $6, to a place like El Paso, which has a very low cost of living, and so we were shooting to get them out after putting them through retraining at about $10.25 or $10.50 an hour. The results were that by doing, and the question and the theme of this presentation was whether government and education and who's helping who. The answer is bringing them together. It is the creation of a public-private partnership, very much, I would say, like what John has done, very much like what we did in El Paso with Project Arriba. So we required that people have a GED or a high school graduation to enter the program, but what we started finding out very quickly is that a lot of high school graduates had about a 6th grade. In one case, we tested people with a 4th grade reading education. So we had to raise our standard and get them to have a 10th grade reading level, reading proficiency. We actually then started an academy that took 8th grade reading level people and put them up to 10th grade so they could then start the program at the community college. What we did, though, is we did not just train people. For example, I know Rosemont has done a great job in their fine arts. I'm sure Villanova does too in fine arts, and here we with Father, in our liberal arts area, we probably put out lots of people like me with a political science degree and all that. There was not a huge need in El Paso for people with fine arts or political science degrees, so we looked into the areas where they were hiring. And healthcare was a huge one. Nursing in particular was a very big one. Some of the IT work was very badly needed, so working on computers and the like. So we decided to train people into areas where they could actually make that living wage, that $10.50 an hour. The results, as I look back, and the program is now in its 9th year. By the way, it took us 2 years of those 9 to get the first 8 people. The first graduating class had 8 people. Now in the entire period, they have graduated 627 people that have graduated. The average graduate salary is $33,000 a year, and you can do the math as to what that works out to an hour. The nursing students, who are some of the best paid, are making $45,000 and even up to $50,000 a year. So we are, and you may say, by the way, El Paso, for those of you that don't know, is a community of almost 750,000 people. So for us to have made a drop in the bucket with 629, but I think it's a great start. And the ability we were able to do, again, was by joining in organizations like the Chamber of Commerce, very much private sector driven, looking at the private employers, the hospitals and the like, looking at the community college, the University of Texas at El Paso, and all working together so that we could get rid of bottlenecks, we could get over hurdles. And what was it that really made this program, or has made this program, a success? These people were in very difficult situations. Again, our typical student was a divorced mother of 3, single parent, aged about 42. Okay, that was the average. So these people needed help with childcare, they needed help with transportation, they needed lots of help. We couldn't just say to them, let's take them and, here's, you get a 2-year sort of scholarship to the community college to study nursing. So it was the ability, I like to use the analogy that if you are on a track, if you watch a train on a railroad track, if a locomotive can come up and push it or pull it or whatever, it moves pretty easily. However, if that train has gone off the track, which is what happened to most of these people, it takes a lot of heavy equipment, takes a lot of work, it takes a lot of people to put that train on the track. And if you'll forgive me for being Cuban, I like to talk with my hands. We had to almost embrace and pick up these people the way you would a railroad car and put them back on the track. And over 2 years, we regularly held something called VIP sessions, Vision, Initiative, and Perseverance. It was Perseverance. And they were the same kinds of things John was talking about with his grammar school kids and into high school, getting them to look at you in the eye, to shake hands, to write a thank you note, to know how to dress. We later figured out it was dressing for success. So I'm a big believer that these public-private partnerships, a lot of state government money came into it, a lot of private money. The Chase Foundation gave over a period of time about $100,000, but the initial $50,000 to kind of kick it off. We then, of course, embarrassed all of our competitor banks to give some money to make this a success, and this thing has taken off. Having said that, this really is not either, I don't think it's either about the program you heard about in Georgia or the program I'm telling you about in El Paso. It's really, what do we need to do at a school like Villanova so that we can create the leaders of the future, knowing that this is some of the raw material that we are being given, people that are graduating from schools where 60% or 50% of the kids are not graduating, and people who are going through life making minimum wage.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. It was certainly very interesting and informative. I hoped that we would have a few questions that would sort of get at some of this. And I would also like to tie in a little bit of what was said this morning about leaders and followers. I think that there's a very interesting conversation to be had about what does it take to educate a leader. And every time I think about that question, sort of 2 phrases come to mind very quickly. One is a quote by Heraclitus, which I actually first heard when I was an undergraduate, and it says, "Man's character is his fate." I always thought that was very interesting because really that idea that who you are is what you become, I then think that relates a lot to how we actually foster character and help our students to grow and learn them, about themselves. I also read one time an advertisement, believe it or not, and it struck me as being really fascinating, and I think is appropriate for this conversation. And it said, "Leaders follow leaders." So when I think about that, what does that mean? I think that if we're going to educate and create leaders in the world, then I think we have to be leaders ourselves. And we have to be willing to touch on some of those character traits that were discussed earlier today, whether it's courage, whether it's self-awareness, whether it's humility. We do have to embody those traits that we would like our students to then go be in the world. So with that in mind, I guess the 3 topics we had discussed, and I'm hopeful that you can shed some light on, are these ideas of access and diversity and service. And I think with respect to access, when I was at the Department of Education, we tended to talk about it in 2 ways. Access was not just about sort of financial aid and scholarships and economic resources that would make college accessible to more individuals, but it was also about the awareness, the eligibility, and the readiness with which I think Tom's program is so obviously building that foundation for. So what I was hoping was that you could maybe talk about how we here at Villanova might be able to increase access and what's been successful for you.
As I mentioned earlier, I am on a group with Secretary Duncan on access, and it's really for access for largely for kids from disadvantaged communities. That's poverty, it's not race, it's poverty, and it's in a failing school. And they can be any color, but it's just how do we get more of those kids into college? And I believe that Villanova has done a great job. I met with the head of diversity, multicultural, Terry Nance. And I think you're doing a great job at Villanova. What I would submit, and I know there's relationships with schools like Cardinal Doherty, but I'll also be the devil's advocate a little bit. That's what I think we're supposed to be doing here, and say that those efforts are competing for the same small number of kids, and the number could be much larger. That's a small pie, and you're competing with St. Joe's, Georgetown, Bucknell, and whatever for that group of kids. If you started sooner in outreach programs, instead of fighting over 1,000 kids in between 25 different schools, you'd maybe be fighting over, if you will, 10,000 kids or 15,000 kids. We've got kids, as I said, in our group, 130 IQ, 125 IQ. We just have some of the kids. A lot of the kids are not in our program. They are not even going to smell college. They're not going to think about college. And I think we can do some programs here at Villanova, go into the community and do an extra step beyond working with juniors and seniors. We can go in, we can have someone on the ground half-time at a parochial school, start them in 6th, 7th, and 8th grade, funnel that into the high school, work with a certain number of kids, 20 kids. You earn your way in, you earn your way out, and have them think about and be exposed to college. We have a partnership with the University of Georgia. That's part of the reason I met with Arnie Duncan. I'd love to have the same kind of a partnership going on in the community here with Villanova. The University of Georgia does everything from bringing down people to the community to talk about how everyone can go to college. We have professors coming down on a regular basis. We have students coming down to work with the kids. We have financial aid seminars telling everybody that you can afford college. The admissions department, someone comes down for expert in writing. We had 4 weeks of a writing course this summer. The kids are much better writers by a mile than they would have been before that happened. We have 7 different elements, 7 different deans working with us from the University of Georgia, not just for the Dreamers, but for others. I would submit Villanova is doing a great job. Villanova does, however, need more diversity. They just need more diversity, not only for different kids from different backgrounds, but they need diversity from other countries, which Al can talk about, more than they have. But mine is access, and for access, I believe you need to grow the pie, and more universities need to reach out to make that happen.
Let me, if I may, let me talk a little bit about diversity, and I'll leave the part about other countries in a minute. You know, I really believe, I spent a lot of time at the bank. I was sort of like, hey, here's a Hispanic guy. By the way, I never knew I was Hispanic until I returned to the United States in 1987 from being overseas. Prior to that, I was a Cuban. You know, all of a sudden I became, there's a new label in the country. So, but, you know, diversity to me is not about, you know, race, color, creed, religion, all those things. It's about diversity of thought, okay? It is about sitting in a room with people that think differently than you do and can give you a different perspective. Now, when you get, you know, pick a dozen of anything, you know, white males from the Northeast, by the way, you could pick black women from the South. If the group looks the same, you're not going to get diversity of thought. So when when I came to Villanova, this was before they were called girls then, you know, before girls were allowed in, except for the nurses. You know, I mean, it was just guys, and it was guys from, you know, New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, you know, a couple from Washington, D.C. You know, so we had the same people. When I was at the bank, we had a very similar looking sort of group. And so what you want to do is, if you introduce to that group an African American, if you introduce a woman, if you introduce a Hispanic, if you introduce, you know, someone from a different region of the country, you're really able to get, you know, true diversity. So I don't know if sometimes, and I think this is what Tom was saying earlier, we're sort of fishing in the wrong pond or something. At the bank, I remember we would all sort of go after the African-American MBA from Harvard, who was at the top of the class. And by the way, so was every other bank throwing money at this one guy. You heard I lived in El Paso, and I know we have a UTEP graduate here with us. Why didn't we go recruiting at the bank at UTEP, University of Texas, El Paso? There were lots of Hispanic. Why didn't we go look, for African Americans at Grambling or something? That was not the thing to do. We all sort of kept going to the same place. So I think part of what we're saying is that we need to be looking in different places to try to fulfill and to get that. In terms of foreign students, by the way, I was not a foreign student. I had come to this country under as you all know, in 1960, Cuba. My family settled in New York, and so I had gone through high school here in the United States and everything, so I was not a foreign student, but there were a number of foreign students here at Villanova. But what more could we gain by getting that kind of diversity and that kind of different thinking here? And what could happen or what would happen if we were to develop some kind of programs with their home countries of these students? Now, I know we've done it. Actually, we've done it. The nursing school has done it and has been very, very successful. And so, how do we expand that? How do we get that so that we can really become, everyone talks about how we are, the world is just smaller, all of our Blackberries and, everyone twittering and doing all the things that get done. This is happening all over the world. Don't we want some of those people from the rest of the world to be here?
I think that's absolutely right. And let me just ask you a final thing before we sort of throw this open to our audience and have some more questions and more dialogue. With respect to your own lives and your own community work and your own work, service in government, what was sort of the turning point? How did you get turned on to doing that? Obviously, service is a big part of Villanova. It's a part of what we mean as an institution, what we certainly try to cultivate in our students. But I'm curious because both of you spent long careers in the business world, and then really more recently, even though, Al, as you mentioned, you've been doing this stuff all along. How did you really make that decision just to say, it's time to give back and to give seriously?
By the way, I know we're getting too religious here, but I had the Marist brothers in high school at St. Mary's, and they were a great example, and everything from canned food drives to help the poor to Mission Day to raise money, et cetera, et cetera. So I think I've had it was sort of imbued in me. It was part of my education, and certainly continued here at Villanova. By the way, I was also extremely fortunate. I've mentioned J.P. Morgan Chase, that I was doing all this stuff, by the way, and I worked on a micro enterprise, micro lending group that was founded in San Antonio when we brought that concept to the United States and so on. This was all kind of on the bank's nickel. I was actually working for the bank. I was putting in a lot of extra time on my own, but to have an organization that fostered my ability to do that and encouraged me, and by the way, the real reward came from the bank was very eager to put its money where its employees' interests were. And so when employees worked in these things, that grant that I was able to get for Arriba was not just because they thought it was a great project, but because I had been working on it and really sold it to the folks at the foundation. But so all of that has to come together. I don't know that we ever stop doing public service. I don't want to say, even though I think this was a very exciting thing, Arriba and all that. To me, one of the greatest things that I've done in my life was the last 6 years when I had the opportunity to serve, and I refer to this country, even though I'm an American citizen, this great country, because it's not the place where I was born, and to serve for 6 years as Assistant Secretary at the Department of Homeland Security, brand newly formed. I had no intention of ever doing government service. Got a phone call and just thought, this country's been pretty great to me. I think this may be my opportunity to do something, and I'm very glad that I did it.
Mine succinctly was my mom pushing me to always try and do something for someone else. I went to an Augustinian high school, which pushed service. I went to Villanova, which pushed service. I didn't listen all that well. I was probably ranked #1 in running keg parties at the VFW in Conshohocken when I was in college, but I did pick up some of those values, thank goodness. The way it really made it easy for me is that, first of all, I think you are blessed, and it's not guilt. You have a responsibility and obligation to give back. I also learned very quickly when I started to do things when I was in corporate America, I got back so much more than I gave. And I get so much more back now than I give. If I made a presentation on an acquisition and our chairman said, great job, you gotta trust me, that is nothing like having Khadija run up in 7th grade and tell me she made for the first time the A honor roll. It doesn't come close. So once you start doing it, you start getting back more each time you do it, and that's why. And I love to get people hands-on, because once I get them hands-on, I've got them. Writing a check, thank goodness for that, we need the checks, but getting someone over there and say, no, just don't write the check, come on over and work with the kids for a day. I got them as volunteers, and they write the check.
Great. Well, thank you for that. So I guess what we were going to have a conversation a little bit about too is government involvement with regard to these issues, and whether it is part of the problem or part of the solution. I agree that I too, when I was at the Department of Education, my job was actually helping to foster those public-private partnerships, working with corporations on their education philanthropy, engaging their foundations in what we hoped would be strategic partnerships with local education entities as well as higher educational institutions. And I think there are a lot of positives to bringing government in. There are also negatives. And I guess I'd just be curious if anyone has some stories to share. I think we are all here to try to learn from each other and think more about how Villanova can engage.
Or questions, I guess.
Questions?
Any stories or questions? Okay.
Villanova students are leaving the institution and wanting to make a difference. All college students do, but Villanova is striking in this respect. The students really want to make a difference, have an impact. Both of you have worked in corporations, in government, and you've also worked in grassroots organizations. What would you advise one of our graduating students about where they would have the greatest impact as future leaders?
I would say that if you were in a corporation, try and get involved in community service in your organization, no matter how small it is as part of the corporation, and then try and do something different. Get your group and get them hands-on. And again, you'll get the return. I think the kids today, Villanova, by the way, the service that Villanova is doing, I think is fantastic. It's so much better than when I was here. It's across the board. The St. Thomas of Villanova Service Day, et cetera, is just wonderful. But getting kids, getting young employees, getting them involved, not across the board in one thing for one day. Wherever you can, get them involved for 6 months in Meals on Wheels. 6 months or a year on helping someone. Make it part of the culture as you move up in the corporation. The community service is part of the requirement. When I moved up to headquarters, and I was supported by the chairman, for my group, I made community service part of your bonus. Well, I mean, they wanted to run me out of town. A lot of the MBAs and Ph.D.s and whatever. And fortunately, our chairman supported that. So when you start out, I'd recommend hands-on, do one thing, don't try and do 10, and get some of your colleagues and make a commitment for 6 months or a year, and it'll take off.
Yeah, I think I would not only echo that, I'd say just try anything, and especially if it's something you like. You know, if you're handy, go build a house with habitat. You know, by the way, if you can cook or if you can eat, you know, go serve people that are going to eat. You know, I mean, anything, just try it.
When I was a freshman in economics class in the building next door, which looked a lot different, I read an essay by Milton Friedman, and the subject was vouchers for education. It's the first time I had ever heard the concept, and it was so compelling to me that I couldn't imagine that anyone would ever disagree with it. and that I could see that sometime in the future that was going to be how public education was implemented, because it just made so much sense. It's 35 years later, and they are virtually non-existent. We have examples all across the country of schools that have terrific success with very troubled kids for a whole lot less money than the public school system in those difficult areas, and more kids would go if they could pay, and they can. You mentioned Secretary Duncan. If you look in his background, it seems like he is a very open-minded guy to different solutions. But lately, since he's become the Secretary of Education, it seems like the mind is not as open, my perspective. Do you see any hope for any new thought on how to approach education, and that perhaps we could open it up using something like a voucher system in the most difficult areas?
I do know Arnie. I've known him for years. And basically, if you read what he's doing now, he's taking on No Child Left Behind, which needs to be taken on because it forgets about the A students and puts in more darn measures and less about results, but more about measures. He's taking that on. He's pushing charter schools. He's pushing for teacher tenure being basically reduced or eliminated. He's pushing bonuses for a good job. The teachers' unions are apoplectic right now. He has had meetings around the country. He is trying to stick to his guns. I personally think there's going to be an interesting dynamic going on in the next 6 months to a year with Arnie Duncan Education. He's got $100 billion. That's more than the last 8 secretaries of education combined. I'm hoping that President Obama does not back him off on that because of the teachers' unions. And that's not directed as a criticism of President Obama. That's just the real life in politics in this country. The teachers' unions are going to do everything they can, I believe, to short-circuit what Secretary Duncan is trying to do. Is he got all the answers? No. Is he perfect? No. None of us have all the answers. None of us are perfect. But I am encouraged by what he's doing. He's pushing charter schools. They're appropriate in some areas. In rural America, they're irrelevant. In most of rural America, where are you going to go? I mean, you're going to create a charter school when there's only one school and you're going to just take certain kids. But accountability, 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 pay for performance, get rid of bad teachers. I have the luxury in my after-school program. I basically, in a nice way, but a clear way, hire and fire teachers all the time. And that's what's needed. Get basic business principles, and he believes in those. Is public education, particularly in the failed schools, more of a problem? Or I think it's more of a problem. Should be a solution. But frankly, I've seen so much, it's just mind-numbing, the number of things that I've come up against in the bureaucracy and principals and whatever, not really caring about the kids. I'm sorry, but so many of them don't. They care about their job and they care about security, but they don't worry about the kids and advancing the ball with the kids. So my answer is a mixed one, but I do see some hope with what Secretary Duncan is trying to do. And he's doing a separate one that I am involved with, so yes, I'm biased, a separate one on college access for more kids. And he is determined to make that happen. And I think that we need more kids from poor communities going to college and going back to their communities and making a difference if we're ever going to break those communities down and make them better.
Even though we lost our moderator, I think we ought to just try to keep going. If there are other questions or comments or other subjects, Dr. Brown had to teach class at 4 and we're supposed to be done at 3:45, but we're running a little late. So
We have time for a couple more questions.
I was going to put on my Homeland Security hat for a minute and just ask a question that I used to ask when I was out, talking to audiences about Homeland Security. These are the kind of decisions, and if you follow me, you'll get it sort of at the end where I'm trying to get to. So we were constantly torn between maintaining security, okay, or facilitation. Facilitation had to do with that container that's coming in through the port of Newark, New Jersey, or Long Beach, or by the way, coming in from Tijuana or from Canada, or passengers coming in through an airport. Do we want to move those people quickly? We get people on airplanes, right? TSA has to check you. So I'd like to see a show of hands. Are you in favor of security, making sure the bad guys don't get on the airplanes, the bad stuff doesn't get into the country and so on? or facilitation? Let's make sure we keep the economy going and working. Security, raise your hand. More important to you? Okay, facilitation, obviously the other half. The answer is both. Thank you, John. John's a member of the Villanova University Alumni Association and obviously a very intelligent individual. This is part of what I believe is happening, and we're seeing it in education, the same way. We tend to have, and I'm afraid, unfortunately, it's just something in this country as a whole, we tend to have, and it's not a Democrat-Republican thing, but we tend to have these polar views of things, okay? If all we do is, government takes over all of this, it's going to be great. Or if we let it, very often, I mean, believe me, the answers lie very much in the middle, and it includes a little bit of both. So what could public schools do if they could put some of these accountability issues? I had the opportunity, the only time I was ever on a school board was the American School in Mexico City, and when we raised, as a board member, we raised the idea of compensating teachers according to their performance. I thought we were going to be run out of town on a rail. I mean, the teachers and the principal was like, just, what, are you kidding me? This is not the way we do it. Well, maybe it ought to be the way you do it, or perhaps you could incorporate some of those ideas, and the other way around for other things. So perhaps the private sector businesses need to have a little bit more of a heart, a little more compassion, and allow more time for the things we heard earlier about just giving people time off. We used to talk about work-life balance. Believe me, it seemed to be work. I don't know where the balance was, So how do we do these things? Very often we need to find that balance in the middle. By the way, we have a new program with TSA. I don't know if you've all heard about it. Your flight will now be guaranteed to be 100% safe. You will have to arrive at the airport 6 hours before so we can have the complete body scan and make sure that everything is okay. So those are the trade-offs we have to make.